population control, a secret Pokemon Cabal, and price manipulation as far as the eye can see. Are these just conspiracy theories, or is there more than meets the eye? I'm Pokemon Classics, and I invite you to join me for a topic today that'll be just a little bit spicy. Let's roll the intro. Hey everybody, what's up from Pokemon Classics, reminding you that the classics never go out of style. You know, there are a lot of different Pokemon trading card game related conspiracy theories circulating from all the different corners of the internet. And that's what I wanted to do in this video, was to peel back the curtain, take a look beyond the veil, and address some of those conspiracies and see if there's any element of validity to them, or if they're just misinformed. Now, I should give full disclosure here, but this isn't one of my videos that has extensive documentation or research or data to support this. These are just my opinions and observations. Nevertheless, I thought they'd be helpful to share because I have been operating in this community for over a decade as a collector, as a seller, and just as an enthusiast of Pokemon. So I think I offer a unique perspective, but it's certainly not a definitive one. So I welcome all of your comments and feedback down in the comments below. But anyway, today I wanted to address 3 specific conspiracy theories that I see very prominently on the internet. The first one is about population control, and that's simply the idea that grading companies are intentionally withholding higher level grades in order to manipulate the market in some way. Now, the second conspiracy theory that I often see out there is that there's an underground Pokemon Cabal of influential collectors that are secretly sharing information and also working to manipulate or pump and dump certain items within the community. Finally, that kind of ties into the third conspiracy theory, but that's the idea that there's intentional price manipulation happening out there on a grand scale. And although I think there does seem to be some instances of shill bidding or other fraudulent sales data, I don't know if that's the case, that it's a large coordinated effort, but that's what we're going to explore in this video. Anyway, guys, strap yourselves in. Let's take a look at some conspiracy theories together. All right, so first up, let's talk about population control. Now, I think it's important that we get an operating definition, and generally when people use the phrase population control, what they're talking about is grading companies intentionally withholding higher level grades, more often gem mint grades, in order to preserve the existing population, the supply, and thereby influence prices. Now, to me, this has always seemed like a nonsensical idea or approach to have, because first of all, there's really no incentive for a grading company to do this. Now, me particularly, I tend to grade with PSA. I know there's a number of other companies out there as well, like BGS and CGC. But in the case of PSA, their reputation is determined based on the accuracy of their grading. And I know there's going to be some skeptics out there because PSA certainly does have their share of misgrades. I don't think anybody would argue against that. But if we're talking about a financial incentive, PSA and other grading companies actually have an incentive to overgrade cards rather than undergrade them. PSA charges an upcharge for any cards that come in at a higher service level. And so in theory, the more expensive the card, the higher grade that it's in, the more fees it's going to gain for PSA. So if anything, I think PSA has that financial incentive to overestimate the grades rather than withholding those grades. However, I think this is all an insignificant argument anyway, because when we take a look at the grand scheme of things, the types of cards that are coming through in low population are mostly set cards, and their values absolutely pale in comparison to some of those much more valuable sports cards and other rare one-of-a-kind items that grading companies like PSA see on a regular basis. You know, we could take pretty much any low population set card out there, something like the Yanma from Neo Discovery, which has a very low population. I don't think there's anybody sitting in a James Bond villain chair out there somewhere, twirling their fingers together, going, hey, we need to suppress that Yanma population. It's getting too high. It's also worth mentioning that a lot of those cards are under 4 figures in price, and so that seems like an odd thing to risk one's company reputation over, or specifically point out individual cards that aren't even popular Pokemon. You know, you take like Blissey or Ampharos from Neo Revelation, and it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I don't see a lot of incentive there for PSA or other grading card companies to intentionally suppress those populations. Now, I think it's important to examine why this theory persists across the internet, and I think there's actually a couple different pieces to it. First, as somebody that's graded for a really long time, there are certain types of damage that PSA looks at more closely than others, and especially with vintage cards versus modern cards, each type tends to suffer from different types of direct factory issued damage. In fact, for a lot of the vintage era low population cards, I've made a video on this before, it has to do with print lines across the holofoil surface, and that's often going to be one of those disqualifiers from achieving that PSA 10 grade. The other part to this, though, that I think has more validity to the argument of population control is that PSA does seem to be more aware and spending more time and attention on cards that have higher values. And maybe that's because PSA offers the grade guarantee and they're financially liable for misgrades and reimbursing a potential buyer if something actually does have damage. But as a result, I think PSA has given more attention and more attention to detail for grading those cards that are submitted at a higher service level. Now, you could rightfully argue that if a card that's submitted in bulk service isn't getting the same quality of inspection as a card that's submitted at a premium service, that it's not really valid and it's not consistent across the grading scale. And that would be a good counter argument, I can't deny that. But it does make sense from a business standpoint, from an economic standpoint, that you really want to be precise and accurate when it comes to those more expensive cards. So I think that does play a role in this. Finally, I'd throw this out there, but a lot of those really low population cards have seen a pretty consistent linear population growth over all of the years. At least all the years since I've been collecting in 2011 and forward, submitting cards to PSA myself, I haven't seen a significant difference in what those population rates are in terms of their growth or their decline. So something to consider. I don't think population control is out there in the way that people think it is, but rather just a product of cards that are difficult to grade. Next up is everybody's favorite conspiracy theory, the Pokemon Cabal. Now, this theory suggests that there's an underground group of influential collectors and investors who are secretly pulling the strings and taking coordinated efforts in order to manipulate the market in some way. Now, one of the key criticisms is that this group is actively and intentionally suppressing information, while at the same time censoring those who have divergent viewpoints from the rest of the group. Now, personally, I've always thought of the idea of a Pokemon Cabal secretly pulling the strings to be a bit nonsensical and self-refuting, because really all you need to do is take a look around you here on this platform on YouTube to see how readily available information actually is for anyone that's seeking it, as well as the diversity of content that resides here. In fact, we could even take a website like E4, which often gets criticized as being like a centralized hub for the Pokemon Cabal, and this is a website that has hundreds of thousands of views every single month. But yet, there you'll find that it's free to access, that guests can register, that new topics are made regularly, and the existing topics that are there are actually much more diverse than I think most people realize, covering things like collecting, playing, news articles, upcoming product releases, and occasionally discussing market dynamics. It's also worth noting that on YouTube, there's more information and a variety of information for whatever your content preference is or how you like to engage with this community. Whether you like business-related content or vintage collecting, pack breaking, there's something there for everyone. Even with business content, there's information that's readily available and shared, free of charge, explaining how to ship items, how to work with a distributor, even how to order items internationally. A few years ago, none of that would have been common knowledge. Now it's available to everyone. Now, I do think there's an element of truth, though, to the idea that there are some groups out there, some Patreons and some Discord groups that are private. But to me, that just makes sense in any community. In any hobby, you're going to have like-minded individuals who want to coordinate and talk specifically about the things that they love. But the idea that those individuals would be able to move this massive behemoth of a market that we have before us, something like Pokemon, the biggest franchise in the world, I think is nonsensical. I don't think that's realistic in most scenarios. I'll further add that most of the people I've met in the Pokemon community have been wonderful people and had nothing but appreciation for all of the different sub-communities out there. That's one of the great things about Pokemon, is that it is diversified. Now, this does beg the question, why does this conspiracy theory persist? And I think that's the cost that we pay for that diversity that I mentioned earlier, that in any sort of community, there's going to be a sense of tribalism when people perceive others' opinions as different from their own and potentially threatening. You get that in-group versus out-group mentality, and it's unfortunate with Pokemon because I would argue that this is not a zero-sum game where we can all cohabitate peacefully. And frankly, I think it's the diversity of interests and content in different directions to go with collecting that make this community so much fun. But that's just my opinion. You guys will have to let me know what you think about the Pokemon Cabal down in the comments below. Finally, let's talk about price manipulation. Now, this one I think is hard to nail down because different people consider different things to be price manipulation. There are even those that would consider buying items to resell or buying sealed product for the purpose of investment to resell later as price manipulation because it's creating scarcity by removing those items from the market without the intention to use them oneself. For me personally, though, I would define price manipulation as any deceptive practices that are used to artificially inflate the value of individual cards or products with the purpose of profiting off of that deception. I think this is a better definition because this encapsulates any falsification of sales data or comps, or the manufacturing of false hype in order to pump and dump a product or a specific card. Now, there's no doubt that this happens regularly on a micro scale, but I think the question is to what extent does this impact the broader market? Because the market is so vast and supply so plentiful for most items that it's hard to imagine this redirecting the market in any meaningful or long-term way. But I think we can all look to instances of shill bidding, unpaid items, fraudulent sales data circulating, but again, usually those things are self-correcting. Sometimes I think we're quick to give too much credit to individual influencers or content creators and having a much more significant impact on the market than they could really ever hope to achieve, because this market is so vast, so striated into different collecting communities, that I wonder what it would actually take to have any sort of meaningful control or influence on the market over a long, sustained period of time. In fact, Pokemon just released its production numbers from the previous year, and just this last year, Pokemon surpassed their record once more by producing 11.9 billion cards. A few different data points or false sales or fraudulent data undoubtedly exist out there from time to time, but I think to keep the charade running, it would require a lot of capital. Maybe it's achievable with some of those lesser scarcity items out there, but generally those are the most expensive ones. So I don't know. I'm sure that there's a little bit of truth to price manipulation. I think we've all seen some shill bidding out there on occasions or unpaid items that have obscured the data pool. But for the most part, I don't really see price manipulation actually controlling or influencing the market in a large, meaningful macro scale. But you guys will have to let me know what you think about that down in the comments below. Finally, let's close this out by taking a look at the origins of these different conspiracy theories. And like any conspiracy theory, I think that each of these are founded on at least an element of truth. When it comes to population control, there are cards that are more difficult to grade than others, and there's probably truth that as cards have become more expensive over time, that PSA has become more aware and attentive to detail on how they grade certain cards, particularly the higher value and rarer cards, where they're more susceptible, more liable to the financial implications of their grade guarantee. There's also truth to the Pokemon Cabal that there are certainly sub-markets that exist, sub-communities within Pokemon that have very passionate interests and common interests, and as they express those different interests, it can rub people the wrong way where they feel like their ideas are minimized or rejected or downtrodden in some way. That just reinforces the importance of how we treat other people and how we approach those differing viewpoints. Finally, when it comes to price manipulation, I think we've all seen that there are certain items that have seen artificial interest over time, and we've all experienced instances of shill bidding and false sales data entering the mix. To what extent that's influenced the broader market, I think is worthy of further discussion, but in my estimation, none of these issues are as prevalent or influential as people think they are. And personally, I think this is just a matter of scapegoating, that it's easier to scapegoat others than to understand the complexities that go into any of these three issues. And don't get me wrong, each one of these issues is a very complex issue. It's not just a black or white, right or wrong situation. To me, this speaks of tribalism in Pokemon, and Pokemon's not unique for this. This is literally everywhere. It's part of human psychology, but it does explain these conspiracies really well, at least in my opinion. When it comes down to it, I think the key takeaway from this video, and I hope this is what you guys will take away, is just enjoy the experience. That's what Pokemon is all about. It's a diverse community, and when we can appreciate that, I think we'll be more content. So don't look for somebody else to blame. Instead, embrace the journey. That's my takeaway message. And guys, I'm Pokemon Classics, reminding you all that the classics never go out of style. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts on each of these three issues. This was kind of a ramble today, but I don't know. Let me know what you think. We'll see y'all with the next video. Till then, everybody, see ya.